So I am hurting in a particularly special way. So we went to Slide Rock over the weekend. So we went up to
Oh,
Sedona, right? So we did the whole like just Red Rocks, just a change of pace.
sure.
And
Somewhere where it's not 115 degrees.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, it was still like no, I don't think we hit 100, but it was pretty close. But you're closer to the sun, so I still burn. Like I'm still out there in long pants and long sleeve shirts because I'm close to the sun.
Oh, yeah. No, no, no. Again, hi.
Yep,
We've
yep.
met. Yeah, no, no. I I can get a sunburn off the reflection off snow if I'm
Yeah.
somewhere in
Oh
winter.
yeah, it's serious. But yeah, no, did Slide Rock. We are having fun, and we're on the very last slide, right? We're like, hey, let's just like go down this little bit here, and then we'll pack up and leave. And I put my foot down on something that was a little too slippery, dude, and I ate crap hard. Like
Oh.
seriously hard. Like I went down. Luckily, I was smart enough, somehow instinctually turned my head so I didn't hit my face, but my shoulder, my arm ended up behind me, and then I hit my knee at the same time. And I came up, and I'm like, oh no, my arm doesn't work. I'm like,
Oh.
oh no, my knee doesn't work. And Caitlin's like, "Whee!" I'm like, stop, I can't save you. I have one arm and one leg.
Oh. Oh my
Oh,
gosh.
God.
I'm really glad you're laughing as you tell the story so I don't have to feel bad about laughing as I hear it.
Dude, it hurts so bad. Luckily,
Oh.
my arm started working again, uh, which was nice.
Yeah,
Like that,
thank goodness.
that happened. That happened pretty quick. But my knee was in bad shape. Like it's still pretty rough. Like if I'm walking or if I'm sitting, it's fine. But like going from sitting to walking, like the transition,
Okay.
oh boy, it's not enjoyable. Or if I make the
Ooh.
mistake and like kneel down, yeah, I'm in bad shape. So yeah, yeah, it's gonna be interesting to say
Yeah,
the least.
no, that sounds that sounds horrible. Um Glad you're all right,
Yeah,
but man.
it worked out. Yeah, but it was an adventure. We'll call it that. How about that?
Yeah, let's roll with that. An
Something.
adventure. As opposed to just labeling it self-inflicted wounds
I know,
or
right?
any of those things.
It's for my kid's childhood.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Which is also why you had to pretend like it hadn't happened and like everything was totally fine
Yep, yep.
or
I
yeah.
still no, I still had to carry the bags out and everything else. So it's just dad life, man. That's what it is. It is. Oh well. All right. Let's hit an intro. We'll jump into it. Welcome to the podcast, Blue Collar Scholars. Not long ago, a group of brilliant minds met together at a pub to discuss their unfinished works. They recognized the value of coming together around delicious beverages and having meaningful conversations. That group was known as the Inklings. The Inkle Do podcast here, we're working to be the second iteration of that group. So, pour yourself a craft beverage, pull up a chair, and join the conversation. All right, man. Have you had anything good lately?
Yeah, I had nothing particularly exciting or interesting. But so my dad and I, our birthdays are very close together coming up later on this month. But my folks are going to be in Denver visiting the sister, hanging out with her for a couple of weeks. So we got together and did kind of a, you know, pre birthday dinner and hangout type of thing, and had a couple of 805s. So again,
Mm,
nothing like super
yeah.
interesting, but again, just one of those like a good clean lager. And man, especially just because of the way that the weather has very suddenly decided to be very, very Phoenix.
Hmm.
Being out by the pool with like a good, just kind of crisp, easy drink lager
Yeah.
is just a good place to be.
Hmm.
But yeah, it was so nothing particularly exciting, but like it was, I haven't had one in, I don't know, it hasn't been that long really
No,
since
we've
I've
brought it up a
had,
couple of times. Yeah.
yeah, it's been probably about a month or so. But I really haven't had a lager since then. So
Yeah.
like it's clearly one of those things that's next up on my list. Next time I get to Kings, is make sure I throw a couple of good craft lagers in there, because I've got to get past that mental block where I still, when I hear lager, I'm still thinking like the cheap macro brews.
Yeah.
Like I'm
Yeah.
still thinking of, it's hard for me to spend like, more than $1.50 on a
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
of lager, because in my head I still have this idea of lager as something that's going to taste mostly like the can that I poured it out of.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I don't even know of any like, and it's hard because they are like you have to be really intentional to appreciate a
Mm-hmm.
lager because they are light and crisp and there are some flavor notes. Like I had one from Italy one time I was at a restaurant and I was like, oh, okay, there's like some subtle differences, but generally, like the point of a lager is to be super clean. So
Right.
there's not a lot of differences, but still, they're the ones where what Helton used to tell us that you can't hide, brewers can't hide behind anything on a lager, so they have
Yeah,
to do it
you
well.
can tell they're good at it if they can nail a lager. But yeah, that's uh, I'm getting ready to move in the next week or two here. Just
Okay.
changing apartments basically.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and so like I've been uh, I man, I was about to try and claim I had been productive, and then realized no, I don't want to lie this early on in the pod, but like at least mentally where my head has been at, I have not been like bringing a whole lot of things in. It's been a
Hmm.
lot more about kind of trying to map out how I'm going to pack things up and get them out,
Right.
because of course I'm moving when it's 115 degrees.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense.
Yeah,
Absolutely does. It's always just how it works out, no matter what. Even if you try not to, that's how it works out. It's just
I blame it a little bit on the teacher life. This idea of like, when do I have time to be moving and finding a place? Oh,
summers.
yeah,
Yeah,
right when
yeah,
it's
that's
the
true.
absolute most brutal time to do it.
That's absolutely true. Yeah, for me, I actually had a similar. So when we were up in Sedona, the little hotel we were at had a little bar with a little happy hour, and everything was little because it was actually a small hotel, but it was they had four local brews on there, and they had church music from the
Oh, okay,
shop.
yeah.
And again, yeah, we were sitting by the pool for we were wasting time basically, so got one of those and we sat by the pool and the girls were swimming and it was hot and sunny but not terrible in the shade and with a church music IPA and yeah, it was nice, man. And that's a good IPA because
Yeah.
it's still got some stank to it, like it's still a little punchy, like it's bitter,
Yep.
but it's balanced. And so it's not just like a fruit juice IPA, but it's still hazy, it's still real juicy, it's still real tropical, but it's still got some hoppy bitterness in there, that like some real strong hop flavor in there.
Yeah, that was one of the first kind of local beers that I heard get attention like consistently.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
from Phoenix specifically, because there's I think it was like Nimbus down in Tucson that had a couple that I heard people speaking nice things about. But yeah, that
Mm-hmm.
shop music was one of the church music from the
The
shop. I
shop.
mean,
Yeah.
was like one of the first ones that people seemed to be recognizing that Phoenix was doing some things.
Yeah. Yeah, they're they're good. I'm not gonna lie. I've only been down there twice, and yeah, I like them. They have a cool story too, just being similar to they started with a coffee company and then moved over to beer brewing and just kind of a cool story. Uh,
Yeah.
but so um while we were up in Sedona, it was interesting. So we did the day trip to Sedona and on the way home we went through Jerome. Have you ever been there?
Yeah, that's a really cool little town.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll say yeah. That's what I'll say. Because like I remembered it being, it's a ghost town, an old
Mm-hmm.
mining town, but like when we were there this weekend, like it was really macabre. Like I mean, everything was
Oh.
devils and death and ghosts And like the whole town now is like all the shops are all about, or I guess if it's not about skeletons and death, then it was about some form of sacrilege. And if it wasn't about one of those two things, it was about crystals. Because again, you're up
Oh,
there, you're near Sedona, so you
yeah.
got to have crystals. But like it was more than I remembered, and maybe I just didn't remember it well. But like,
It might be like, so it's been, I was just trying to think in my head now, and here's another one of those things where you can tell you're getting old. Everything seems like it was just a couple of years ago, and then as I'm doing the math, I'm like, oh, no, no, that was probably about 4 or 5 years ago was the last time I was up there.
now
But
that's
I
still
think,
that. I mean, ghost towns don't change a whole lot.
well, no, that's true. But like, I feel like one of the things that, so I noticed that when I was up there, I was visiting actually a buddy who was still a seminarian at the time. Now he's a priest, with a couple other friends who are also Catholic. And so, like, we went up, he was in Cottonwood actually. And then we
Okay.
just sort of kept going a little ways up to
Mm-hmm.
Jerome. And when we were hanging out, it was one of those things where, like, there were pockets. Like, there were things that are just like the actual town where there's not a
Mm-hmm.
ton going on.
Right. And it's on the
And
side of a
then
mountain. Yeah.
and then there's the like, but yeah, you're right. Actually, most of the restaurants had some kind of either like ghost or
Yeah.
skeleton, or there was some kind of, like, the idea of it being a haunted place is
Right.
definitely the
Right.
marketing, no doubt about it.
Yeah. And there was some more, like there was like some art pieces and stuff that I feel like maybe I missed before, but
Mm.
I don't know. And then also, I mean, like you got Maynard from Tool, like that guy is like set up shop in there. So you're like,
Oh,
it's not necessarily like, it's not going to be like wholesome home if Maynard is like selling his wine there. But anyway, but the thing was just like, I've kind of been, and it, full transparency, it could be me because like I might be like triggered on the stuff because I picked up a book from college. I've had it for however long since I've graduated college, 2008 or whatever. So I've had it for a long time. Telling myself, I was like, I'm gonna
decade and a
read this.
half, yeah.
This is super interesting. I want to read this book, and I just now picked it up, and it's on witchcraft from what is it, 400 to 1700 or something like that. So like it's just kind of like the span. It's like witchcraft in Europe, basically,
Okay.
and it's I kept it because like one of my crowning achievements of my college education was justifying the burning of witches. Right, like I actually got my
we,
teacher to
we,
give
we
me
talked
an
about this. I
A,
remember that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and she's like, "That's a good point," and I was like, "Thank you very much."
I'm not saying they were right. I'm saying if they were right about witches, they would be right about burning them.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, like, they were just being consistent with their beliefs.
Yeah, and
If you believe
I
that,
think that was
you
the
would do
foundation of
that.
my argument. Is that, yeah? So I finally picked it up, and it's been interesting to say the least, right? Like, and when you dig into this stuff, like you can't help but be like, anytime you're focusing on a particular topic, you're going to be triggered. You're going to be looking. You're going to notice it more in the world than you've
It's at the
ever
front of your
noticed it.
mind.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, everything that connects to it stands out more, no doubt
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah. And so, like, one of the pieces in the introduction had that I thought was really interesting was the progression of Satan and in this stuff. And like, I always get weird about this stuff because it's like whenever you like, is it like Candyman? If I say it 3 times, is he going to show up and like poof in the middle of the podcast and have to exercise him out of my bedroom? Like, I'm not interested in that, but it is an interesting topic, and the way that they presented it, because I like this book particularly because most of them in college, it was like, oh, I can't ever think of the word, anthropology, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's like the study of humans.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
study
the
of the
movement
human
of progression.
person, what
Yeah.
humanity is. Yeah.
So most of them look at it like that. So they like strip all the spiritual relevance out of it, and it just like, oh, these are humans trying to make sense of a crazy world. And they kind of take that out. And so they legitimately address it like, this is what people really believe, and they're not discounting it. And so they're like
Mm-hmm.
looking at the literature and all of these things, and then the history and how it progressed. And the history of Satan was super interesting to me because I don't think I ever realized that it changed. Like I always thought that we had had the same image of him throughout our history, but we really haven't. And so I kind of wanted to lay out the history and then just be like, I don't know, see what you think about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it was starting out, one of the things I found the most interesting was that the early church didn't give him a lot of credit. Like they weren't worried about him, they weren't thinking about him, they weren't like doing all this. Like he was, like in the book of Job, a still a servant, like an unwilling servant of God, a tool of God. How about that? Instead of a servant, because he's not
No,
willingly.
I like the phrasing of an unwilling servant. I like that a lot because that acknowledges that like he's trying to go against him, but it doesn't really matter.
But
Like
it's
he doesn't
all
actually
under
have the power to be a threat.
right, and it's all under God's sovereign will.
Exactly.
Right,
And so
God
God continues to
willed.
bring these good things out of every time that like Satan thinks he's gotten a step forward, God's like, actually, you just took 5 steps back because here's how I'm going to use this.
Right, but at the same time, also God willed the pain on Job,
Right.
like or permitted
Yes.
permitted the
His
testing.
permissive will.
But I mean, like it's still like it's not like he
God could
didn't.
have stopped it.
He didn't. It's not like he didn't know that's what Satan was
Right.
going to do. You know,
God could
so
have stopped it. God was aware it was happening,
yeah,
and God allowed it.
right.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how they saw it, is that like whatever he was doing, he was basically doing at the will of God because God was willing it. And then we get into one of the primary issues that the early church had, which was dualism,
Mm-hmm.
right? And basically, theirs was that, their good and evil were equal, fighting each other. And that was Augustine and the Manichaeans,
Mm-hmm.
right? That was the big battle. Augustine wins, obviously, right?
Yeah.
But what was interesting is that the dualistic impression of evil stuck around. So like, and this got my brain churning. I was like, well, that makes sense because every time you interact with the other, you're different. Like every time we have a conversation, you're different. I'm
Yeah.
different because we're
Absolutely.
interacting with something that's not ourselves. Right. And so the church actually changed a little bit in its battle with dualism. And one of
Right.
those was the image of Satan, who, instead of being kind of a folky, uh, kind of an imp, almost like a troublemaker or a trickster, or would it be compared to type of a thing, but not like a physical dangerous threat,
Mm-hmm.
um, becomes like a power to be reckoned with. Like now he's powerful. He's not just like this little trickster thing that pulls on your hem and gets you to do stuff like it. He's a legit threat. He's a power, because that's what the impact that dualism had on it.
I think that's largely accurate. I think to me the thing that like as I was reading over the notes and everything, one of the things that kind of stands out to me is that I think a lot of what happens is that there is over the course of history, there's a shift in perspective in terms of how we're evaluating Satan.
Mm-hmm.
So like in the early church, they're evaluating Satan and his threat compared to God and his promise and God's
Mm-hmm.
power and what God's capable of.
Mm-hmm.
And so they very accurately come to the conclusion, well, he isn't one.
Right.
Like
Right.
a battle between God and Satan is not actually a reality because there's no battle.
Yeah.
In the same way that like a 5th grade basketball team playing the defending champion Denver Nuggets is not really a basketball game.
Mm-hmm.
Like they might be able to get out on the court, but that's literally as far as the competition goes.
Right.
And then I think what we see when we get to like the stuff with Augustine and his battle with the Manichaeans is that we see this shift kind of because of the dualist's perspective was about like whether he's a threat to us.
Hmm.
And so like in the responses to that, which Augustine, yeah, he won because he was right. And
Right.
so like I'm not arguing against any of what St. Augustine said in response to the duelists, or even in terms of what a lot of the people after him said.
Right.
What they said was right, but it's shifted the perspective now to
Right.
where now we're not evaluating Satan as he would compare to the power of God. We're comparing Satan as he compares to the power of us.
Mm.
And and if we're doing that, oh yeah, now he's a threat.
Right. That's
Yeah.
interesting. And that make you know what that makes me think of is like Screw Tape's like 1 degree difference.
Yes.
And it plays out because like as we go on to the next stages of this, like you just see, because this is the beauty of looking back at history, is that you can see the 1 degree difference because it plays out and becomes huge
Over
over a
millennia.
thousand years,
Yeah.
exactly. Because the next step is Aquinas, and Aquinas is tasked with like systematizing everything. And so it goes from the devil being just like now he's a power, but still kind of like a folk thing that's running around in the villages, to now he's a hierarchical enemy, right? So like there's a hierarchy of hell similarly to a hierarchy. So now you have Satan at top and you have these subdemons and these, and so there's a hierarchy of power, and you have, like the kingdom of, like Jesus is accused, how can I cast out demons if,
Yeah.
by the name of Beelzebub, if, kingdom
Talking
against
about a
itself
kingdom
can't.
divided
Yeah, yeah.
against itself and all that. Yeah.
So now you have Satan is like this hierarchy. He's powerful and he's structured. So now he's mimicking human structures, which is interesting that you pointed out, because I hadn't made that connection. I was just looking at the
Well,
progression over time.
and also keeping in mind that like those human structures are mimicking heavenly structures. In terms
Yep,
of that
yep,
idea of like
yep.
God, the choirs of angels, uh, like there is some of that in there as well, where like, which again from the systematic approach, like oh yeah, again Satan can't create because he's not God, he doesn't have that power, so instead it's about those like imitations, those
Mm-hmm.
1 degree off imitations that happen.
Yeah, yeah. And that is actually, so from that point, because Aquinas is like around 1,000, right, or 1,100.
Yeah, 11, 1200, somewhere around there.
So that is kind of like the height of, in for my book, which is focused on witchcraft, that's kind of the height of like witchcraft, and that's where people are really like, there's a lot of writings from bishops addressing soothsayers and all of this stuff. And then the next big evolution, the big jump, which isn't until like 1600, is skepticism comes in.
Mm-hmm.
And so doubt, and people are starting to say like this stuff's not real, like there's no witches, like you get real skepticism. And then you're starting to get scientific advancements, and you're starting to get humanism, and all of these different things are coming up. And what happens is everything becomes skeptical, and then art comes in. And art comes in and starts enhancing the devil, right? Like you get Faust and the
Mm-hmm.
deal with the devil, like you get those stories coming around that time. And so they start like emphasizing the devil and his power. And then they similarly, art is emphasizing the suffering Christ instead of, so simultaneously, we have a change in the perspective of the devil. So now he's like this devouring lion that is, after humans and doing
Mm-hmm.
all kinds of things, making deals to take your soul, and he's outsmarting you, and he's better in every way. Simultaneously, the church has a change in God being, instead of being like the all powerful judge, to becoming the suffering Christ for you, who is kind of constantly plagued by this lion that is pursuing you. And right, and without the suffering Christ and the ministry of the church, so like there's this really big change in perspective, again, both on Satan and on the Christian view of God.
And I think a lot of it though, the danger can be to look at things too progressively in terms of history as like a straight line that's
Right,
happening,
right.
because
No, that's like 400 years. Yeah,
oh yeah, no, absolutely
yeah.
not, but not just that, but also in terms of so like you mentioned the idea of how the early church viewed Satan, but then you quoted St. Peter in one of his letters talking about your enemy the devil is prowling like a roaring lion seeking to
Mm-hmm.
devour. So like both of these concepts have always been there, you know. Like yeah, you've got the account of Job, but you also have in Judges and Kings and Samuel all of these references to again the soothsayers, those who are communing with the spirits of the dead, and the dangers of
Mm-hmm.
this, and it having to be outlawed, and all of this. And so like they've both been present, but again, it kind of comes back to that: where is the emphasis at? Because yeah, both are true that Christ is the almighty victor who has triumphed over all things. He did that through his suffering. And so there's
Do you
I think
think
this
that they
idea
had the same knowledge though? Like, do you think the people that were in like, because I mean, like, the Bible wasn't widely available or translated in those early in the Middle Ages, was it?
the Bible would have most likely still been primarily in Latin. And so you would have heard like homilies and preachings in your native tongue, but the actual readings probably not super widespread.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is like again, I think it's entirely accurate and worthwhile to look at kind of the historical shifts in where these perspectives and these emphases are happening because they tell us a lot about what the struggles were at the time. You know,
Mm,
like you said, I don't
okay.
think it's a coincidence that at the time when things like witchcraft and temptations of that sort are really flourishing amongst the people, that there's also this big push to look at like, no, 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 you don't need to make those deals. You don't need his help because Christ has already endured and paid the price for you on the cross. Your victory has been bought already through what he's done. As
Yeah.
opposed to
I,
I guess so my whole thing is just this idea that like
No, I think there's a representative piece there, like where it's representing what they're struggling with. And I think what I want to add on to that is that I also think it represents a little bit of what they're struggling against at the time, right? So, like the
definitely.
perspective, so like Augustine is struggling against the Manichaeans,
Yes.
Aquinas is struggling against, I don't, probably everybody at that time.
Well, so at that point it was a lot of
But it was just like struggling against a diaspora of a church, basically, right? Like we
sort
needed
of.
to kind of
Well,
pull it
and
together.
that, and also the fact that it was a much smaller scale version of kind of like watching the church try and exist in the modern age, like once social media and email and stuff like that was becoming popular. Because similarly, around the time of Aquinas, things have started to settle enough, and we're now in contact with the Muslim world on like
Mm-hmm.
on an actual communicative level, where it's not just the Crusades.
Right, right.
But like that's where a lot of the stuff is coming from. And so you're right, yeah, having to try and be like, okay, cool. Here are a million other thoughts that are being presented to us. Which of those are like pieces of truth that like help clarify what we already know about who God is and what we've been handed? And what's the stuff that's like, yeah, no, 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 this sounds real nice, but if you think about it for another 30
Mm-hmm.
seconds, you're going to see where the problems lie.
Yeah. Yeah, because my thought is, and one of my last thoughts on this is that like it's like what they're struggling against and how they're viewing Satan, and kind of we had somebody at the church recently talk about their evangelism in Europe and how Europe is basically like the most atheistic place in the world right now. And I he said Germany is like 99.6% atheist, and or something like 90 or my 96% atheist, something where it was like the very vast majority of it.
Yeah.
And my thought in a lot of that, as it came to that kind of that conclusion where the devil seemed to be being heightened and the suffering of Christ was being focused on, like those two things. And I'm like, I wonder if there's something to this vision of evil that challenges our faith, that kind of like, or just that this progression in Europe where evil continued to rise and Christ kind of continued to be minimized, and now we're stuck in this place where we had the execution of all the Jews and now everybody's an atheist.
I mean,
Like, is
I
there
don't,
some connection, you think?
I, I, I don't think I can say that they're not connected. I mean, I don't feel comfortable saying like at this point because like that's a really profound statement and one that like it's like oh, I think there's something to that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I got no proof, but
No, but I mean like well, but to a certain extent you do because you are right. Like the First World War was the war to end all wars for 20 years.
mm-hmm.
And then World War II happened. Like, if you want to imagine the most horrific time travel conversation you could possibly imagine, go back to, like, I don't know, 1928 in Europe and be talking to someone about, like, oh, man, that's right, you guys just went through World War One, huh?
Yeah.
And, like, wait. World War One?
Yeah.
No. That suggests sequels. Oh, yeah, my friend. And so, like, I do think there is definitely something to that. But I also think, I think part of it is that a, we have a tendency to get very focused on whatever our view is
Mm.
until something massive shakes it.
Right.
You know, like
Yeah.
when you
The
look at
other.
these, going back to that, like, what are they arguing against? You know, what leads to the shift? Augustine having to talk to the having to
Mm-hmm.
resolve things with the Manichaeans.
Yeah.
What leads to the shift? Aquinas having to confront all of these other systems, but at the same time, I don't know, man. I don't think that's. I think it would be too simplistic to say that's what it is, as
Right.
opposed to saying that's part of what's going
Part
on.
of the, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And I think if I was going to pull all this into a life lesson here, it's just, I think I was posting on our social media for the from our heretics conversations like months ago, and
Mm-hmm.
just that it's important to know what we believe and how we came to believe it. Like, again, last week we said church history matters. Like, this is another example. Like, our church beliefs have changed, and again, we've been in conflict with different ideas, and understanding how those ideas have changed us over time, I think, is important. And it's also rich, right? Like people groups like love their heritage because that heritage struggled to have the identity that they have, right? That's
Yeah.
part of the richness of being a Christian. We have 2,000 years of struggling history on top of a Jewish tradition that goes back way more than that, right? So there's a richness to knowing this history, and it makes your faith so much more enjoyable.
Oh,
I'm trying to, enjoyable is not the right word, but if I said rich one more time, like the sentence was just going to be
fulfilling,
awful.
complete.
Fulfilling,
Like,
better word.
yeah,
Yes.
no, absolutely. And kind of building off of that, like, for me, that's where, again, we kept talking about how these perspectives and these emphases have shifted. It's so important to know the whole story
Mm-hmm.
because that's the counterbalance. Like,
Yeah.
Augustine dealing with the Manichaeans didn't cause Augustine to view Satan as a threat to God's divine plan.
Right.
Why? Because Augustine knew the whole package of what he was
Right.
working with.
Yep.
And Augustine could talk about, yeah, no, Satan is a threat to me. I'm not as smart as he is. He's an angelic being. He knows more than me. So, yeah, he's a threat to me if I pull myself away from God, which is why I'm not going to do that.
Right. Right.
Same with Aquinas. Like, he's able to talk about these like powers of hell and able to list out like what powers they have, and for him he's not viewing them as a threat because yeah, their powers fit in these boxes,
Yep.
as opposed to God who goes beyond all boxes and all containment.
Mm-hmm.
He's not actually a threat. He's worth knowing about because yeah, those pranks that he does possibly put our souls at risk if we go along with him too much. So
Yep.
yeah, we need to know.
Yep.
But they had that perspective of the whole picture, which
Yeah.
allowed them to like acknowledge and respond.
Yeah.
And that's what's so crucial for us is that we don't lose sight of it. Even C.S. Lewis in the Screw Tape Letters talks about that idea. Like one of the things when Screwtape's nephew Wormwood is
Mm-hmm.
like considering, like things are going so well with this guy, and so he's like considering, do I reveal myself? Do I show myself like we used to back in the Middle Ages? And Screwtape's advice is, we found that really effective back then, but with the modern man, we find these temptations, these subtle ones, work
Yeah.
a lot better.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's important to know like the whole package, because
Yeah.
otherwise that's what the pranksters, those demonic powers such as they are, that's what they're looking for, is where do we have a shaky foundation. It's kind of like when you were walking in line as a little kid in grade school. Actually, I'm going to say when I was walking in line,
Hmm.
because I don't want to assume everyone else was doing this kind of evil stuff. But you know how, like, you could try and give someone a flat tire at just
Mhm.
about any
That's what I
point,
was just thinking about.
but
Yeah.
that's not what you're doing. You're not doing it at any point. You're waiting. You're waiting. When are they so focused on the conversation that they're not supposed to be having in line that I can really get them now?
Yeah.
Or, ooh, this person's shoe is like not really tied. They've got the skater shoes on with like the laces that are just there for decoration. I can get this person's leaving his shoe behind if I get him. And like that's kind of what it is we need to know the whole package so that we are ready to respond to all of it and constantly
Agreed.
growing closer to God.
Agreed. And that's one of the things that, because there's some good topics that come out of
Oh
this,
yeah.
and that's one of the things that I'll have to remember as I'm reading, is that this is one side of the story. There's an orthodox conversation that's happening simultaneous with these other conversations that these bishops are having and things like that. So, but one thing that you don't have to worry about is that the Capuchins worked with the Pope and got coffee sanctified. So coffee is actually a blessed beverage. This was a long time ago because they didn't want the Muslims to have it. So it is an approved drink.
Didn't want them to have the monopoly on
The
it.
exclusive rights
Yeah,
to it.
yeah.
There
I
you go.
was gonna say it wasn't about trying to deny our Muslim brothers and sisters their
Oh, it
coffee.
absolutely was. Let's be
No, it
a
was trying to
little
make sure
serious.
that we didn't have to buy it from them.
Oh,
But
that's probably fair too. But you do have to buy it from us, unfortunately. And that's how you support our meaningful conversations. So hop on that website, grab some coffee. Love to roast you some fresh stuff, get you some good conversations, good cup of coffee. Got you on that one. Huh?
oh my gosh, yeah, no, I'm crying a little bit.
That's fantastic. All right. With that, everybody, we will say
Adds you.